is your weekend? Same thing. I miss you a lot. I miss you.
So for the rest of you kids, if you would like to have a go, if you would like a turn, only half of them listen, they're all back to what they were doing before. Other kids will get to have a go. So Joseph had a dream. Joseph had a dream about his brothers bowing down to him, and it's a dream, but it's a vision. But all of us in life have dreams. All of us have something that we want in life, and I think there's actually something in that quite often, that God has something for us that He actually wants for us in our lives. Sometimes we can identify what that is, sometimes we can't. Sometimes the dreams work, and sometimes the dreams go astray. I want to talk initially, though, as I said, about Joseph's life and Joseph's dream and how things played out for Joseph. You heard what Grace read before. Joseph, he starts out as the favoured child, and parents will never admit to having a favoured child. Probably don't ever admit that to your children, but Joseph's dad was quite happy to admit that he had a favoured child. This is my best one. Joash is the favoured child over there. Well done, Joash. That's fantastic. That's excellent. You'd be really worried. That would be
The awesome one.
Joseph has a dream, you heard, where he's the hero. And he's the hero, and his brothers bow down to him. And so, of course, he tells his brothers who already hate him because everyone knows that he's the favoured child. And so he tells his brothers that one day you're all going to bow down to me. And they're like, no, now we hate you more. We already didn't like you, we already hated you, now we hate you even more. He then has another dream, and he tells his brothers and his dad. He didn't learn the first time that wasn't a good idea to tell his brothers. He still told his brothers. He told his dad as well. Even his dad says, look, this has really got to stop. His dad rebukes him and says, this is enough. You can't keep on having these dreams and telling people that people bow down to you. That's actually not okay. Those of you with multiple siblings, if you start telling your siblings that they're going to bow down to you one day, that's not going to go down very well. And if you have a sibling who thinks they're better than you, that doesn't go down very well either, does it? So, of course, his dream goes astray. He thinks that life's going great. He goes to find his brothers. Not very wise, I think, by his father to go send him off to his brothers. Maybe his father was hoping that things would get sorted out. Things don't get sorted out. As we heard, Joseph, he gets sold by his brothers, which is a step up by being killed. What a great bunch of brothers to have. That, oh, we won't kill you, we'll just sell you off as a slave. So that's what happens to Joseph. He gets sold by the Midianites. The story goes on. He's bought by Potiphar, the captain of the guard in Egypt. And Joseph works his way up in Potiphar's house. Joseph still acts with integrity, mostly, as far as we can tell, at least better than what he did while growing up, telling everyone that they're going to bow down to him. And Joseph ends up being the lead guy amongst Potiphar's servants. Potiphar's wife sees this. Potiphar's wife notices that Joseph's an up-and-comer. Potiphar's wife notices that Joseph's a good-looking young man. Potiphar's wife says, you're a slave, I can do with you what you like, and so Potiphar wants to sleep with Joseph. Joseph says no. Potiphar's wife gets Joseph in trouble, and Joseph ends up in prison. And there he is. While Joseph is in prison, though, Joseph again works his way up while in prison. Joseph still, he acts well, he does the right thing, and eventually he ends up in charge in prison. And then Joseph interprets for two other prisoners their dreams. And he thinks, I've interpreted these dreams. One of these guys is Pharaoh's cupbearer. He says, remember me when you go to Pharaoh's cupbearer and then Joseph's thinking, I'll get out. Things will be great. The cupbearer doesn't remember Joseph, forgets about Joseph, just goes back to living the good life again. And Joseph is in prison and forgotten. Eventually, though, Joseph gets remembered. Pharaoh has a dream. His dream is, the cupbearer says to Pharaoh, hey, I know a guy who can interpret dreams. He's in prison. Let's go get him. He'll interpret your dream for you. And Joseph gets released. And the dream is about famine in Egypt. Joseph comes up with a plan. He gets an opportunity to come up with a plan. And Joseph gets an opportunity, and Joseph ends up being in charge. Many, many years down the track, Joseph's brothers come down to Egypt looking for food, because the famine is also where Joseph's brothers are. And Joseph recognises them. They bow down to Joseph, and Joseph remembers his dream. 13 chapters in about 3 minutes. I hope you can follow along with that. This kind of story is the same as last week. These are the kind of things that you need to read your Bible for. Not because God says so, or because it's a good Christian thing to do, or someone guilted you into it, but because there's stories in there that are just remarkable, they're weird, they're bizarre. If you were going to write the stories that are in the Bible, you couldn't come up with something as fantastic as what happens in the Bible, because it's just, some of those events are just strange, but there you go. So that's Joseph's story. What's that got to do with you? Here's my question to you. What's your dream? And I hope you have one for your life. I hope you have a goal or a plan or something from God that you're working towards, that you believe God wants for you. That you look at your life and you look at what it's all about, and it might be a simple dream. It might be, I just want to be a good spouse. It might be, I want to be a good parent. It might be, I want to be a good child to my aging parents. It might be, I want to do well at work. It might be something you want to achieve at work. It might be something you want to do through charity. I hope you've got something. I hope you haven't lost, in the battle of life, the ability to dream. I deliberately used Martin Luther King Jr. for that slide because in the middle of terrible circumstances for African American people, he had a dream. And because he had his dream, the dream became, and because of how he shared his dream, that dream became famous, and still in America, African American people are striving for that dream, but still hasn't fully been fulfilled. I want to ask you, do you have a dream? I hope you do. And then if you have a dream, are you talking to someone about it? I hope you're talking to someone about your dream. Because if you leave your dream on the inside, there's a good chance it's going to die. Joseph did share his dream, did talk about his dream, perhaps didn't choose the right audience, but at least he shared his dream. But when you choose who to talk about it, I want you to talk about your dream to someone who wants the best for you. Someone who you know is on your side. Someone who you know is not threatened by the fact that you have a dream for your life, that you have a hope for your life, that you have something that's giving you passion, something that's giving you energy. When you choose who to share your dream with, I want you to choose someone who is godly, someone who's following Jesus, someone who has the wisdom of God to share. And finally, I want you to share that dream with someone who is mature. Someone who has some spiritual maturity about them, and someone who has some emotional maturity about them. These are the people to share your dreams with, because if you share your dream with the wrong person, your dream will get crushed by that person. There are people who will be threatened by your dream. There'll be people who will be intimidated by your dream. I think we have a video. I want to just talk before you press play, or just pause that. That's fantastic. This church was founded with a dream. And it's important for those, especially for those of you who haven't been here very long, it's important for you to know what that dream was. And so during this message today, we're going to jump in and out of this church's dream and how that dream has played out so far. And the reason we're going to do that is because in the story of Joseph, as I hope we've already started to identify, we find something of ourselves. And in the story of Joseph, we find something of us as a community. Thanks, Kerry.
So the dream started with 3 people going to a church planning conference in 1998. 3 families being commissioned a few years later at Paravista. 3 years of hard work, of planning and dreaming and strategic mapping. And then with Therese and I being blessed as the husband and wife church planning team back in the year 2000. So what was the dream? It was of a church that would be culturally relevant, that would be denominationally inclusive, that it would touch the heart of the Mawson Lakes community and beyond, and that would connect people into a relationship, a journey of discipleship with Jesus. And for those years, those first years of Mawson Lakes Community Church, we lived and breathed MLCC. Our team grew and we all gave it all. We dreamed initially of, where would God take us? Would He grow us into a mega church? Or at least a big church? And as the years passed, despite amazing outreach and incredible opportunities, that's not what God had for us in a community where a large section are only here for a few years and then move on. Regardless, it was exciting, it was challenging, but for all, and particularly Therese and I, MLCC, the dream, was our baby. Then...
Oh, sorry. There's more. Can you work your magic, please, Gary?
So the dream started with 3 people going to a church planning conference in 1998. 3 families being commissioned came my accident. MLCC, the dream, was our baby. Then came my accident. And an unholy trinity of bad things happened. As my physical condition grew worse, our family was in crisis. And people in the church community could see we were hurting. It led in the end to a complete emotional and physical breakdown. And we had to step down, and I had to step down as pastor. And it was awful. It was awful for everyone. We were broken, congregation members gutted. It's often said that a parent never gets over the loss of a child. And for Therese and I, it was as if our dream, our baby, had died. And even to this day, it still hurts.
So it's important that you know that. Those of you who lived that with Stephen and Therese, you will remember that. You'll remember that time, and you'll remember the pain and the sorrow during that time, and the hard times. We'll talk a bit more about that. I'll just flip for a moment into where you might be at though with your dream. You might be at a similar stage perhaps. We finished off the Bible reading earlier, and I mentioned briefly afterwards about Joseph. He has his dream, but then his dream disappears when he's sold off into captivity. He goes from being in charge of his destiny to having his destiny in the hands of others who don't want good for him. They're in it for themselves. And both the dreams that we have as individuals, and the dreams that churches can end up having as well, can end up being held captive to selfish wants of others. You may have had in your own life been captive, had your dream held captive to circumstances, to illness, physical or emotional or mental illness. You may have felt forgotten, or that your dream has been forgotten. And that's certainly the case of what happened here. I'm going to ask Percy to come up, and I'm going to ask Percy just how things were from his perspective during some of that time. So Percy, if you can share, first of all, you were here while Stephen was here, and then you carried on as chairperson afterwards. Can you share first of all, as a friend of Stephen's, share first of all how that played out?
Yeah, I'm just going to premise that to say that I've got some notes in front of me, and I'm going to be looking at them because it was a very, it was a very emotional time, and there are things that I don't want to get carried away with. So, out of respect for a lot of people who were here at that time, I just want to make sure the things I say don't cause pain. So my recollection at the time was of pain, lots of it. Frustration, and in the darkest times, feelings of terrifying hopelessness and of immense loss. From my viewpoint, I watched this loving, immensely talented, very cool, compassionate, and joyful servant of God, someone who I looked up to so much and depended on for a range of reasons, drowning in a sea of despair. His world was collapsing around him through no fault of his own, and he was desperately thrashing about through brokenness and his pain and despair for a lifeline that simply wasn't there. Any lifeline to save the dream that he and Therese had worked so hard for. He watched behind the veil of hopelessness when every question he asked, everywhere he went, and everyone he turned to would give him the same painful answer, that his life, the dream, everything he had hoped for was over. His life would never be the same. His family would never be the same. This safe and inclusive worship space that he and Therese had lovingly given birth to would simply be ripped away from them at their finest hour.
So I'll avoid any commentary, but I'll just ask then from the perspective of the congregation here, speak about life in the congregation at the time as this was happening for Stephen and Therese, and then also there's two sides to of what people went through as you can speak to what you went through as chairperson and what the congregation experienced.
It was a tough time, and it was brutal. I knew very little about anything at the time. Everyone was after me for answers to questions that I didn't even know existed. The congregation loved the Abrahams. The thought of losing them was painful to many. I had to find a way to hold it all together, to try and retain the vision and the values that the Abrahams had created for MLCC. A call process had to be tailored to MLCC's particular needs. We're not a traditional Lutheran church, and it had to be devised. I worked in collaboration with the district to ensure that the Abrahams were taken care of financially, and also to find innovative ways to continue to worship every Sunday. And you know, we had Ron and Marion and Terry and Grace and a whole lot of people who stepped up to the plate then. It took a while, but in time we were able to pull it all together as a congregation and keep the fires burning. We also organized many events that focused on building engagement and fellowship, and raising funds, and together we marched forward, always hoping and praying that the Abrahams would return to us one day, and our prayers have been answered.
So that's the first, I guess, the first part of the story of this church, and we're not doing it anywhere near justice. So as I mentioned earlier, that wasn't the whole story. It's a significant part of the story. What's interesting as Joseph's life continues when he's in prison is that he still acts with integrity. It's the amazing thing, if that was me, if that had happened to me, I would have dropped my bundle pretty quick, I would have thought. I would have cursed God and cursed my brothers and looked out for my chance for revenge. I would have, if I was ever going to get one, if I got out of prison or got out of slavery. Joseph, and we forget this, is an heir to the promises of Abraham. God made a promise to Abraham, and God said, "You'll be my people." And Joseph still knew that. He's only a few generations down. There's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, if you follow through in Genesis. And so Joseph still knows who he is, and Joseph still knows he's owned by God, and Joseph still acts with integrity. Joseph still acts with honour. Joseph still knows that he belongs to God. And so he does three things that I think are worthwhile anyone knowing, worthwhile any of you knowing wherever your dream is at. And these things are so easily forgotten because we end up stuck and curled in on ourselves because of the amount of pain that we're in. And it's okay that that happens. Joseph does these three things. First of all, he lives an upright life. He still lives with honour and integrity. Second of all, he serves. In whatever way he can, limited as it might be, as small as his capacity is while he's in prison, he still serves. And third, he upskills himself. He gets better. He gets increased responsibility, and so he gets increased opportunities during that time. Those three things are so hard to do. But they're all things that are actually placed in us because we're made in the image of God. It's still part of who we are. Ask Sean to come up. Sean was part of the church while Stephen was really on his way out, if I remember right, on his way down. And then Dennis Oates was the pastor who filled in for a little bit. And then Stephen Troutwine came in, and Stephen's daughter, Yo, is here. And Sean's just going to talk about, we're going to talk about first, about the grace of God and the faithfulness of God and the church during that time. You can sit or you can stand, up to you.
He told me I've got 2 minutes. At that time, we arrived at the church with our 2 wriggly little boys who would sit up the back and slap each other. And nothing much has changed really, except that they're larger and they slap each other a bit harder. But when we started at the church, we hadn't been here long when Steve had to pull out. And I remember a feeling of just that really deep, deep sadness. And it really hit me one day when we were praying the Lord's Prayer. We really had to stop doing that. But when we said the words, "Your will be done," I remember I was up the back having a bit of a tear, thinking, yeah, your will be done. And when we're dealing with God, be very careful about saying your will be done unless you mean it, because you don't know where it's going to take you. Yeah, so there was that really deep sadness, but that sense of, well, if we are going to be obedient and submitted to God and say, your will be done, we need to take this journey, wherever it takes us. But I think we can all rest assured that we've got a God who loves us, and he loves his people, he loves his church. And his church is all of us. I mean, it's all of us. We are the church, all of us. And God has already drawn up the itinerary and booked the airfares and booked the accommodation, and he's got the journey in front of us if we'll just be faithful and submitted and obedient. And he'll take us where he needs to go with his church. And where he needed to go back then is different from where he's taking us now. Now, I've got a 17-year-old child, same age as the church. And what he needed as a baby is not what he needs now. He got home at 12:30 last night. And obviously I had to take a slightly different approach now to what I did when he was a little child. But that's because he's now all grown up. And churches grow up as well. And what they need is different. And we've just got to go with God and go where he takes us. And trust him and be obedient and be submitted. Your will be done.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, that probably sums it up really.
Just watching my clock. Thanks, Sean. It's interesting that eventually, decades down the track in Joseph's life, decades, can you imagine waiting that long? Can you imagine not actually getting to see fulfillment at all? See, here's the thing that I don't want to make this mistake that preachers often make, which is that, you know, Joseph's life turned out okay, so your life can turn out okay. That's actually not true. Okay? It's actually not true that everything turns out great in this life. You only need to watch the news to see that. You only need to talk to your friends to see that. You only need to hear the stories you've heard today to know that not everything actually turns out the way we hope. And so that's why it's so important that when opportunities do come, that we use them. Because opportunities are a gift from God. Opportunities are a gift from God to create opportunities for people who don't have opportunities. Joseph ends up free of prison. He ends up as Pharaoh's advisor, second in charge of the country. And Joseph has an opportunity to finally get everything he wants and to use it all for his own advantage. Joseph saves Egypt from famine. Not only does he save Egypt from famine, but as it turns out, he saves neighbouring countries from famine. And Joseph ends up having his brothers come and bow before him, and then Joseph remembers his dream, and then Joseph has a choice. What am I going to do with my hungry brothers? What am I going to do with their hungry children? What am I going to do now? Those of you who still have dreams, and I hope you have dreams. Those of you who perhaps have been through that captive stage, and you're starting to come out the other end, you've gotten better, you've skilled up, you've served, you've stayed faithful. The opportunity comes your way. What are you going to do with the opportunity that God puts in your hands? If you have opportunities now, what are you going to do with what God has placed in your hands. This church has an opportunity. It's a 17-year-old church. Next year we can start drinking. That's pretty cool. Legally. No more grape juice. I don't know. We have opportunities in front of us. We're a well-fed, well-educated, wealthy church. Now, we might not be all experiencing that on an individual level. That's a different matter. But if you are experiencing it on an individual level, you've got an opportunity to help those around you. But what's the opportunities that God has given us, and what are we going to do with them? What does God want this church to do with what is before it? And I can tell you, it's got at least something to do with that original dream. It's got at least something to do with that original hope. This is a church that has dealt with those cross-denominational issues in a fantastic way. I tell everyone, I tell all my Lutheran friends about this church all the time. They ask me a question, I say, oh, we got Baptists, we got Pentecostals, and they're like, oh, so you let them come? No. No, it's not that we let them come. They let us come. Oh. If you're from another denomination, you don't have to give up your denomination to be a part of this church. If you're from another culture, you don't have to give up your culture to be a part of this church. I even had to give up how I like the chairs on a Sunday morning today. Alright? And I'm pretty OCD about these chairs. I talked to a few people about them this morning. Pretty OCD about chairs in church. I don't have many OCD issues, but chairs are one of them. The chairs were different this morning. Could barely cope.
We asked for 110.
I did ask for 110 chairs. I'm still not coping, Colin.
There's 77 here today. Yeah.
This church has opportunities in front of it to make a difference with this school that we are linked to make a difference with that university across the road, to make a difference with the refugees who gather each and every weekday just up the hill at Ingle Park, to make a difference with single parents in our community, to make a difference with people who have mental health problems, to make a difference in the wider church that is really struggling with knowing what to do and how to do it. And there's so much good stuff in this church that we can make such an impact on not just our church and not just our community, but people around us. I want to finish by talking about the dream of God. I think this church was started with the dream of God, to be honest. In Revelation chapter 7, John gets to see the future. John gets to see a taste of heaven. And we get a taste of heaven each and every week here. John records this in Revelation chapter 7. He says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.' All the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures. They fell down on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, 'Amen. Praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honour and power and strength be to our God forever and ever.'" God has a dream, and God places that dream in you and me. And God places that dream in churches. God places that dream in church leaders. God places that dream in church planters, in church founders. A dream of barriers being removed between people, and a dream of praise and worship in the presence of God. Just two Bible passages I want to finish with. Towards the end of Joseph's story, he gathers with his brothers. And he says to them, because they're worried about revenge, he says to them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And then Paul writes in Romans, Paul who knew suffering so well. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. That's us. And those that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified.